Today, we're going to talk about a weird economic mystery. It's a story about the corporate undead, companies that are technically alive, but are really just shuffling along as part of a living dead economy.
You've probably felt it, right? For years now, it seems like something's been holding our economy back. Real dynamic growth feels like a thing of the past. Productivity is kind of sluggish, and everything just feels stagnant. Well, what if the culprit isn't some big, obvious villain, but something that's been hiding in plain sight all along? Let's start the investigation.
To figure out what's gone wrong, we first have to understand how a healthy economy is supposed to work. And it's not just about growth. It's about a constant cycle of renewal, a natural process of corporate birth and death.
The economist Joseph Schumpeter had a name for this: creative destruction. Now, it sounds harsh, I know, but it's pretty much the engine of capitalism. See, old, inefficient companies are supposed to fail. That's the destruction part. But that failure isn't the end of the story. It's actually a new beginning, because it frees up all their resources, their buildings, their equipment, and most importantly, their people, to be snatched up by new, innovative companies. And that's the creative part.
And this, right here, is the absolute heart of our mystery. What happens when the companies that should fail just don't? What happens when the destruction part of that cycle gets jammed? Well, you get a system that's all clogged up with the corporate version of the undead. And that brings us to our hidden culprit, the zombie company. It's a really powerful metaphor for a massive problem that's been lurking inside the global economy. So, what in the world is a zombie company? Well, think of a company that's basically trapped in a financial twilight zone. They make just enough money to pay the interest on their loans, to keep the lights on and stop the creditors from knocking down the door. But, and this is the crucial part, they don't have enough cash to actually pay back the loan itself, let alone invest in R&D or new equipment or any kind of future growth. They aren't growing, they're just surviving. Economically, they're already dead. So how do you actually spot one of these corporate zombies out in the wild? It really comes down to one simple but pretty brutal financial number. That key metric is the interest coverage ratio, or ICR for short. And with this ratio, the magic number is 1. If a company's ICR drops below 1 and stays there for a couple of years, congratulations, it's officially a zombie. The math behind this is actually way simpler than it sounds. The ICR just divides a company's profit from its operations by how much it owes in interest payments. So look at this example. If a company makes $9 million but owes $10 million in interest, its ICR is 0.9. That means it literally isn't making enough money from its actual business to even cover its interest bill. It's just bleeding cash to stand still. And you can see this financial sickness in how they behave. Zombies aren't the cool, innovative startups. They're usually older, legacy companies that just haven't been able to adapt. They don't spend on the future. They're completely stuck in maintenance mode, just patching up old systems, and they're totally dependent on their lenders just agreeing to roll over their debt again and again and again. Okay, so a few weak companies are being kept alive. Why should the rest of us care? Well, because this isn't just their problem. It's a hidden drain on the entire economy. It affects jobs, innovation, and all of our prosperity.
And this isn't some new thing. The whole idea came out of Japan's lost decades back in the 90s, when banks just kept propping up failing companies. But the problem went global after the 2008 financial crisis. To save the whole system, central banks everywhere dropped interest rates to basically zero. Debt became incredibly cheap. And that cheap debt was a lifeline that allowed zombies to multiply all over the world throughout the 2010s. And then, most recently, huge pandemic support programs gave them yet another lease on life.
This quote really just nails the problem. Zombies don't just use resources, they trap them. They're like these economic black holes, sucking in all the vital stuff that the rest of the economy needs to grow. And this economic drain happens in 3 main ways. First, they hoard labor. They trap talented, skilled people in dead-end jobs. Second, they trap capital. They tie up money in loans that could be funding the next great startup. And finally, they create what's called a congestion effect. Basically, by just existing, they push down prices and profits for everyone, which discourages even healthy companies from investing and expanding. For more than a decade, this world of super cheap money allowed these zombies not just to survive, but to multiply. But that world is over. We are now entering what could be a great reckoning. And here's the twist.
The one thing that could finally cleanse the economy of all these zombies is the very same thing that makes this moment so dangerous. Rising interest rates are the natural disinfectant. As borrowing gets more expensive, zombies just can't afford to pay their debts anymore. The lifeline gets cut, but a sudden cure could trigger a massive storm of bankruptcies.
So this brings us to the absolutely terrifying dilemma that policymakers are facing right now. Do they step in again to protect these companies, save jobs in the short term, but basically guarantee long-term stagnation? Or do they step back and let them fail, unleash creative destruction, but risk a really painful recession? It's this awful choice between immediate pain for long-term gain or short-term safety for long-term decay.
So we're left with this fundamental, really tough question. After a decade of propping up the weakest links in the economy, is it finally time to just let creative destruction run its course? Is a painful culling of these corporate zombies the necessary price we have to pay for a more dynamic and prosperous future? That is the difficult question we all now face.